Hello, family. So here we are, still in chapter 3 of Ephesians, studying the letter of the Apostle Paul to the Ephesian church. And we're in the first section still. And we're going to finish that first section today. And it is the believers standing in grace. And the next section is the walk and service of the believer. This is kind of a typical thing that Paul does in his letters. He kind of starts off with the grace of God, the salvation of God, the goodness of God. He gives us the platform. Maybe you could almost call it the soil or the nutrition that we need as believers, and then he will go into the work of the believer, and that's the walk and service of the believer is the next section. So we're going to be finishing this first section today, which is the believers standing in grace. The last time we talked, it was on the love of God, and it's such I keep going back to how mind-boggling it is. The love of Christ, the height, the depth, the breadth, the width, that cannot be fully known, or as the New King James puts it, it cannot be fully understood. It passes knowledge, is what the New King James says. And it's because it's so vast, it's like an ocean. And I really long for a greater revelation of that love. I really long for that, because I think that if I had that greater revelation, I know I have a fair amount of revelation of that love, but I feel like to understand or to grasp even a greater glimpse of that would really revolutionize a day. It would revolutionize, those moments where maybe you feel despondent or despair. If we could know that love of Christ, how big it is, how vast it is, how much like an ocean it is, and that it's for us, how revolutionary would that be? Well, today we're in the verse 20 and 21 of chapter 3. And I'm going to just go ahead and read it. It says, now to him who is able to do exceedingly abundantly above all that we ask or think, according to the power that works in us, to him be glory in the church by Christ Jesus to all generations forever and ever. So, I like this verse too. I didn't want to cover it the last time because I feel like there's so much just right here too. This is, such an amazing statement if you think about it. Now to him who is able to do all that we ask or think. No, it doesn't say that. It says, now to him who is able to do above all that we ask or think. No, it says even more than that. Now to him who is able to do abundantly above all that we ask or think. It says even more. Now to him who is able to do exceedingly abundantly above all that we ask or think. How? According to the power that works in us. That's an amazing statement. I think of Jesus when he was with the disciples, and the disciples came to him and said, hey, Jesus, send these crowds away. They've got to eat. They're hungry. It's late in the day. And Jesus turns to them and says, hey, you give them something to eat. And they're like, what? And they say, all we have are like 5 loaves and 2 fish. And it's this kid here who's got a lunch. And he's like, bring them to me. And then he lifts them up to heaven, and he breaks the bread. He prays and blesses the food and breaks the bread and the fish, and he starts handing them to his disciples, and they feed 7,000 people or something like that, 5,000 people. It was unbelievable. And then at the end, the he says, go and pick up all the fragments. And so they pick up all the fragments. And there's like, each disciple had a basket full of food. And you just think about that. Like that was exceedingly abundantly above all that they could ask or think. Jesus took 5 loaves and 2 fish, and he turned it into something that would feed the multitude. He loves doing that. He loves baffling us. He loves blowing our minds with what he can do. I mean, I think about David. I think is another great example. Here you have Goliath. He's the huge tank. The ultimate military weapon. And he's defying the armies of Israel. He's huge. He's like almost 10 foot tall. What you think about this guy's bed? I mean, it was just massive. He's huge. He's a big guy, and all of Israel, all of King Saul and all his armies are just completely freaked out about going against this guy, because the deal is that if he wins, then all of Israel becomes the Philistine servants, and if the Philistines lose, then all of the Philistines become Israel's servants, and nobody's willing to go and take on this guy. No one, because he's so massive. But then here comes little David. He's just a little shepherd. He wasn't even there to be in the army. His dad sent him to bring some cheese to his brothers. He gets there, and he hears Goliath do his rant. Goliath had been doing this rant for day after day, and for like 40 days. And he hears the rant. I defy the armies of Israel. Send me a man that we may fight. And David hears this, and the Spirit of the Lord comes upon him. And he's like, who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he would defy the armies of the living God? And some people hear him, and they're like, wow, that's impressive. This is great, and so it gets around, and then he winds up in front of King Saul, and he says to King Saul, hey, don't worry, King Saul, I'm going to go take on this guy. And King Saul's like, you're a boy. We're not going to send you out there. He'll have you for lunch. And he's like, hey, I have defeated the bear and the mountain lion. And, when they tried to take a sheep, I went after it and I struck it and I took the sheep back. And this Philistine will be no different. And King Saul's like, okay. Which I'm surprised King Saul was willing, because he's kind of risking all their servitude to the Philistines on this boy. So, David tries on the armor of Saul, and he's like, I can't do this. So, in the end, he goes out there, and he's got a staff, a shepherd's staff, and a slingshot. That's great. So, Goliath's all mad at first. He's like, what? Are you gonna come? Am I a dog that you're coming at me with sticks? He's offended. And he's like, come here, boy, and I'll feed you to the birds, And David says, you've defied the armies of the living God. And today I'm gonna take the head off you, and we're gonna defeat all of your army. I mean, like, David went way above just defeating Goliath. He said, we're taking you out and all your army out. And when he said that, Goliath was mad, and Goliath starts running at David, and David, he doesn't freak out. He starts running at Goliath, and he's got a slingshot. And so, David starts whipping that slingshot around. He's yelling. Goliath is yelling. They're coming at each other, and David, he whips out that slingshot, and he starts whipping it around and releases that stone. And I think an angel just made it, took that stone and made it supersonic, and it just embedded itself in Goliath's head, and bam, he fell down dead. And then the armies of Israel were like, oh man, I'm into this battle, and they all charge out and they chase down the Philistines. That's a perfect example of how God does exceedingly abundantly above all that we could ask or imagine. I mean, that was way above anything they could ask or imagine. And so, this is the power that works in us. His power is working in us. Those of us who are saved, those of us who have given our lives to Christ, this is the power. The power is working in us, and He is able to do exceedingly abundantly above all that we could ask or think. How big is my God? How big is your God? I feel like sometimes I make Him so small. I put such limitations on Him. I get worried. I'm like, oh no, what is God gonna do? This is a tight spot. I don't know if He can help us here. And it's so silly. He's the God who created the heavens and the earth. And how big is my God? Sometimes I don't know. It's like there's this disconnect, and I don't get that. To Him, to God the Father, be glory in the church by Christ Jesus to all generations, every generation, all the way up to us. To Him be the glory, because He can do this. He's poured out His love on us, with a greater grasp of that love. Oh, what could we do? And then with a greater understanding that He can do exceedingly abundantly above all that we could ask or imagine. That is glorious, and it's His glory. It's nothing of us. It's Him. It's what He's doing. It's His glory. And it's to all generations, from the beginning of the church to the end of the church age. It's all of His glory. What He does with us, this broken down, there's nothing special about me. It's all Him. He's done the work. All I did was I just placed my faith in what He did on the cross for my sins. And then He did the work. And He's doing the work. It's continual. It's repetitive. It keeps going on. And I think He wants us to grasp these truths so that we can move on to the next section, the walk and service of the believer. All right. Well, God bless you. And I'm praying that we all have a greater revelation of His love and how He can do much more than we could ask or imagine.